I moved to San Francisco in the late 80s, and I had a housemate who said, "Oh, I heard about this group called ACT UP that's meeting. Do you want to go to a meeting?" It was the first meeting after the FDA action in 1988, in October of 1988. They were really excited. There was this sense in the room that these were people who were changing the world. And there was nothing more exciting to me in my, political 20s. At that point, I knew about HIV, but I didn't know that I knew anybody who had HIV. As friends died from HIV, it quickly became my life as well as a political life. The AIDS movement has roots in the feminist movement. I mean, you can trace it back to the Black Panthers as well, but oppressed communities not having access to the tools they needed to survive and creating them for themselves. The same root of what we needed to do around abortion rights and reproductive justice was the root of what people with HIV were fighting for in terms of control over their own body, access to health care, the ability to have the information that they needed in order to save their lives. To their credit, there were a lot of very feminist gay men, queer men in ACT UP who came and did abortion clinic defense with us, for example, and were a key part of that and really got the connections. Women were definitely the minority in ACT UP, certainly in ACT UP San Francisco, and there were definitely challenges related to gender dynamics within the group. It was extremely frustrating, either men using sexist language, not listening to women, not paying attention to us, not taking us seriously, when we were in fact doing huge, enormous amounts of work and organizing stuff. Every single committee had women in it. We were, in many ways, some of the sort of core of the group that was keeping things going. For me, I quickly found my way into the Women's Caucus within ACT UP San Francisco. So the Women's Caucus was a place where we could both work on issues related to women in HIV, which didn't get a lot of attention otherwise, and where we could provide some sort of support and solidarity as women in a predominantly male organization. We spent a fair amount of time within the Women's Caucus and ACT UP talking about lesbians and HIV and the potential of HIV transmission and safe sex for lesbians or for women who have sex with women. Sort of because of the invisibility of lesbians, the Centers for Disease Control and so on were not going to provide any accurate information where, they were going to pretend like lesbians don't have sex. Among other things, we put together packets with condoms and gloves and dental dams and lube and little flyers and handed them out in the lines outside of women's clubs. And so that was one of the things that we did that was more about women-to-women transmission of HIV. My sense of where the lesbian, bisexual women's community was around HIV and their response to AIDS. One, it was somewhat generational in that younger women were more likely to be involved. And second was that it really depended on what kind of interaction women were having with gay men as to whether they got more involved or not. Even with the sort of separatist gender dynamics among the LGBT community, there was still enough crossover that people felt called to take care of their brothers. I do think that when it came to lesbians with AIDS, queer women, lesbians, bisexual women with AIDS, that was a lot more challenging for a lot of lesbians because it generally implied either drug use or sex with a man or both, which didn't quite resonate with the respectability politics of a lot of the lesbian community, for example. Yesterday was the anniversary of my girlfriend Thor's death. She died in 1996. Wonderful butch lesbian who had acquired HIV through her injection drug use. She'd been using meth in San Francisco. I don't think we can talk about women in HIV without talking about women and drug use. The reality is, especially in the early years of the epidemic, most of the women who acquired HIV acquired it through either their own drug use or a partner's drug use. The stigma and the lack of access to healthcare services is that much greater if you are perceived to be a person who's using drugs or if you are a person using drugs. So I think that just as we talk about the sexism and the racism affecting women with HIV, we also need to talk about the lack of access to health care and the stigma and the stereotypes that we throw at people who use drugs in this country. We can't end AIDS until we end the war on drugs. There are all these ways in which the war on drugs has made the HIV epidemic worse, and I think that that is particularly true for women with HIV. For women activists who are in ACT UP, some of our stories are different from the men who are in ACT UP because by and large we've survived it in ways that a lot of the men that we worked with, worked for, took care of, loved, were friends with, didn't. So we're still here to tell our stories and they aren't. There's a fear and a terror and a sort of animating energy and an anger when it's your own body and when it's your death that you're facing, that for the rest of us who are HIV negative going through it, it's the grief and the loss, although of course HIV positive people have experienced that same loss over and over again. I learned so much from ACT UP that I continue to use in my life, in my work today, how to work with the Board of Supervisors, how to get legislation passed, how to hold a protest, how to, how to get arrested, how not to get arrested. I'd give up all of it to have my friends back, but they've enabled us to move forward in our lives and do things that we want to do.